feels like it's been almost exactly a month since our last episode, and time just flew. Oh my goodness. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to my studio. My name is Michael Markowski, and I'm so glad you're here because today I want to attempt once again to recreate another painting by another one of my favorite artists. And today we are going to be looking at Georgia O'Keeffe. And Georgia O'Keeffe was an amazing artist, incredible, super interesting person, and I've just been listening to a whole bunch of interviews with her over the past week, and if I wasn't already a big fan of hers, just listening to her talk has just made me fall in love with her all over again. So we're going to attempt to recreate this painting by her from 1936, Jimson Weed / White Flower #1, and I was going to say I was going to go into a story here, but we'll save the stories for when we're talking about her biography. So maybe let's just take a look at what I like to do here is the scale of difficulty for this particular painting. So I'm going to say we're going to be around number 3 here, intermediate. I'm going to do a little bit of glazing technique introduction, so if you've never done anything like that, that's where we're going to be. And again, this has no reflection on Georgia O'Keeffe's ability as an artist. I would say she was one of the greatest artists of all time. She was an expert in her field, an amazing artist. But I think just in terms of our class, I think this is about a number 3 here. So intermediate is if you've had a little bit of experience painting with me or other people in the past, this should be, it'll be a challenge, but I think it's something you can do. If this is your first time ever watching me or first time ever doing a painting class, this is going to be a little bit tricky. And while I encourage anybody to try making a painting, I don't want people to kind of get overwhelmed and then give up making art altogether, which can happen, right? You get a little intimidated, maybe this isn't for me. Okay, so here's the plan. We're gonna talk a little bit about materials that are required. We're gonna get the image transferred onto the canvas. I'll show you where to find that for free and get started. We're gonna stain the canvas with some paint, then we're gonna talk about the biography of Georgia O'Keeffe. And underpainting, I'm not sure. Now, I am going to try to do this painting a little bit faster, but still I'm thinking probably about 4 hours from here to end, which I know is a little bit longer than some people would like, but that's just kind of how long it's going to take, I think, to get something decent that I can be really happy and proud of. And I think that's still probably much faster than some people would like and will spend on their own artworks. I love seeing all of the names in the chat here. There's Bella. Says, I can't watch your so anticipated live show, but I will check out the replay. So very sad. I'm going to give a thumbs up before anyone else, before I leave my home. Happy painting. Thanks, Bella. There's Pascal drumming out. Awesome. Hi, Pascal. Hi, everyone. Sandra says, yay, Georgia time. Hee hee. I'm in front row seat in class today. That's awesome. Sarah says, we missed you. Pascal says, live in a moment, making sure tea is not mixed with paint. Yes, I definitely try to keep my paint cups separate from my water. It is so hot today. I just have water, no tea today. We're in a heat wave here in the Pacific Northwest. So I'm actually wearing a pair of shorts. Usually I'm wearing jeans and even long johns on my jeans, under my jeans. But it is hot today. So and Isabella says, hello from Iowa. Really enjoying your channel. Thank you, Isabella. Great to see you there. And Lisa says, hi, Michael. So glad you're back. Awesome. Great. I love seeing all these familiar faces and new faces and names in the chat. That's awesome. Okay, so let's get right into the swing of things. Just a quick reminder to hit subscribe, especially if you're new. That it really helps support the channel. Hit the notification bell. Depending on an episode, somewhere between 40 to 60% of people are not subscribers to the channel. So people who just tune in and then maybe tune back in randomly. But if you're a subscriber, that really helps out a YouTuber like myself. So it doesn't cost you anything. But if you do want to support the channel with a small donation, you can leave one. My recommendation is to use the PayPal link down below. You can also send an e-transfer via email, or you could send a check in the mail. If you want my email or to contact me to mail something, my email is on my website. That link is somewhere down there in the description below to the website. You can go check it out. You can, of course, donate via Super Chat through YouTube, but they take like 30-40% of whatever you donate, whereas PayPal takes like $1, right? So that's my recommendation. And thank you, everyone, for your support. I really do appreciate that, especially people who donate after just watching older videos as well. That is really cool. First step is just quickly talking about materials. Now, I have done a whole episode talking about all the materials that you might need, but I just want to kind of go through this because, again, not everybody has watched all those episodes. I just want to cover really quickly some things on screen, and if you want more information, go and watch those previous episodes. So we're going to be making an acrylic painting on a 9x12 size canvas board here. I'm going to talk about the paints we're going to use here momentarily. Here's some extra materials you could use to get started. I always suggest having clothes and rags and everything ready, expecting to get paint on them, because you will. You're going to get paint on places you don't expect to, whether that might be your hair. Sometimes you get paint on your foot or your sock, and you're like, how did that even happen? Right? But paint will find a way. It's like glitter, right? So it's only, whereas if you're wearing clothes that can get paint on them, you're less likely to get paint on it, surprisingly. It's when you're wearing your like good church clothes, that's when you get covered in paint. So we're going to use a system here called the split primary palette. I didn't invent it, but it's certainly my goal in life now to popularize it and make it more well known, because I wish I knew about this 30 years ago when I was just starting out painting. It's not something I even learned when I was in high school, and definitely not something I learned when I was in art school. And if I had known how all of this worked, you know, when I was a teenager or something, I'm very happy with the way life has turned out thus far, but I think it would have given me lots more opportunities, and I would have known how to express myself creatively through art at a younger age, and there would have been just that more opportunities, I think, available to me. So I've stumbled upon this when I started teaching, and I've had an extensive career teaching people of all sorts of different ages and in different situations. And this has just made the most sense. And I think once you understand this system, it's going to make painting a lot easier. So we're going to use 2 yellows, 2 reds, 2 blues, because every color has a temperature. We're going to mix our own black here. And the reason I think this is important, and the reason why I think it was essential for people to know this system, because once you understand this, you can do anything, right? It's sort of like learning how to drive a stick in a car. Once you know how to do that, standard or an automatic, so easy. You can do anything, right? It's because every color has a temperature, and understanding color temperature, of which the split primary palette method emphasizes, I think it helps you really understand, you know, what colors to pick when you want to pick a color, and especially where to place colors, because warm colors appear to come forward, cool colors appear to recede. So if you're mixing colors, all you got to ask yourself is, where is the color? Is the color that I want to paint in the foreground? It's got to be a warm color, and you got 3, like, how many fingers I got? I got 3 warm colors. And if it's a color in the background, well, it's probably going to be one of our 3 cool colors. Now, I'm kind of it makes it sound a little bit easier than it is, but once you understand that, it's going to simplify everything for you. So let's go through some of these paints really quickly. Now I'm going to use this Amsterdam brand. I'm not paid, not sponsored, not given a free dollop of any supplies. I have bought everything that you're going to use in these episodes with my own money. Well, through in many instances through the donations of people like yourself. So this is a paint that I've used for hundreds and hundreds of paintings on this channel, and it works. So if you want to get similar results as I'm going to get, you could print this out, take a photograph, go to your art supply store, order it online. Now I'm going to go through a whole bunch of brands. There's lots of different ones you can use. Golden would be one of the best in terms of quality, but it's going to be way more expensive. You're talking about 4 or 5 times the price often for golden paint, for less paint too, right? And I haven't used all of these brands, so I can't say whether or not they're all going to work, but these would be my suggestions for the colors that you would want to pick or order when you go to your art supply store, when you order from these websites online. Most of these websites, or most of these brands here, have their own website, although often you can't order directly from them. You have to order through like an art supply store or Amazon. One thing you'll find is that Amazon charges way more money for acrylic paint than they should. I think it's just people who've bought the paint and they got it sitting around in their basement and they're going to sell it. Because you can easily spend 3-4 times the amount on paint from Amazon than you could from your local mom and pop art supply store down the street. So I would recommend supporting your local small business as opposed to Amazon. Love Amazon. They're super helpful, but, you know, they don't need any more support than they already have. Okay. So I do have a couple of recommendations of paint not to use, which is this museum color out of Toronto, and the Peebo, which is one of the main paints you can get at Michael's Art Supply. Both of these brands put more titanium white paint in their mixtures than they need to or should, as far as I'm concerned. So it makes it impossible to make your own black. You're always going to get kind of a gray, and not even a very dark gray at that. And so if you're mixing and you're trying to do what I'm doing and you're just like, why is this not working out? Am I doing something wrong? If you're using these brands, no, you have an excuse. It's not your fault. It's the paint company. Now, some of the other brands I showed, they may recreate similar effects to what Peebo Museum do. So if you find that, please let me know so I can cross them off our list here. Okay. There's Unsnool there. Says, seeing you after so long, back at painting. I'm so happy. Great. Nice to see you too, my friend. Awesome. Okay, so let's jump right into it here. Let's get an image on the canvas. Now, you could take my free drawing course. The most popular thing I've ever done in my life is my drawing course on YouTube. Hundreds of thousands of people have done it and love it. But if you're just here to paint, then what you can do is you can download the free template that I've created and do an image transfer. So let me show you how to do that. So first, let's just show you where to find that. Oh, quick shout out to the Facebook group. Join the Facebook group next week. We're going to be doing a feedback episode. I got a lot of stuff I got to catch up on. Amazing things that you guys have posted to the Facebook group. So anything, drawings or paintings that you've been working on that you want a little bit of feedback or just a old-fashioned pat on the back, congratulations. Then upload it to join the Facebook group and upload it there. And also, it's in a wonderful community. I'm hardly ever on there. There's a lot of people who are on there all the time and who are always answering questions if you have some. So I encourage you to join that. Anyway, let's go to the Dropbox folder. So I think it's the second link in the description below. If you click that, you're going to find a lot of folders within this folder. At the very top, you're going to find all this information to get you started, including the supply guide, which lists all the paints that we just went through. So you could easily print that off, go to your art supply store and see what they have there. And then you've got the next, 50 folders that begin with letters. These are all easier paintings that a beginner can do. Some of them are maybe misclassified a little bit harder than others. And then you get to the ones that begin with numbers, and then these ones are often more complex. These are intermediate to advanced paintings, and you see the folders just go on endlessly. We are going back up. I put today's paintings into one of the first folders here we did. We did a George O'Keeffe painting 2 years ago. And so let's click in this folder. We did this orchid that she painted, I can't remember, I think 1941. So it's a few years after today's painting. Here's the Jimson weed, white flower. We're going to paint, maybe Thursday. We'll see how time goes. So inside this folder, you're going to see 4 files in here. And of those 4 files, you're going to see there's the original artwork. There's also the outline that I did using the Procreate app on my iPad Pro. I just traced it all out. Excuse me. And then a little bit of a slightly something that's not in usually all of those folders, but is some instructions which you can print out at home. This painting we're doing today is one I often teach in class, in person, and that's why the instructions are here, because not everyone wants to listen to me talk. They just want to do their own thing. So that's what these instructions are for. Eventually, I'll do instructions for all 344 episodes we've done here, but you can imagine it takes a little bit of time to put all this together. There's Ari. Ari says, hello, I missed this too, though I've been busier myself. Good to see you in the chat. Thanks for tuning in as well, Ari. Okay, so there's the original. There's a JPEG and a PDF version of the outline. You can print this out on your inkjet, laserjet printer at home. And once you've got it printed out, we're going to transfer it onto canvas, right? So simple here. Now, we're going to transfer to this 9x12 sized canvas panel. I like these. I think I've ordered these off of Amazon. These are one of the few things I like off of Amazon for art supplies. And so they usually come wrapped in plastic. I take the plastic off, and then I apply some white acrylic gesso over top of the surface. And what that does is it soaks in, and it helps fill the weave, the texture of the canvas, which is a fabric, right? And just like any fabric, it's got some texture to it. And some people love a lot of texture when they're painting. Some people prefer a smoother surface. I like it to be a little bit smoother. So the reason I just keep flipping this on the other side is you can just see here's my fingerprints and where the paint is dripped off. Because I applied some gesso, I put it on some kind of a blocks, let it drip over the edges onto some newspaper overnight. And I usually do about 30 or so of these all at once, so I do one big mess. And then once they're dry, the next morning I just take some sandpaper, or actually what I do is I take an electric sander and I quickly go over, because I got so many to do all at once. And then I got a nice smooth surface. I'm not sure if it's visible or not, but one thing I've learned over the years is, actually I'll just show you this. Here's some paintings I've been working on with my daughter. And this is the way I tend to kind of store these. So we were making some 4-leaf clovers and maple leaves here. But I just put a little piece of cardboard here, speaking of Amazon, right? I just cut up those boxes. And that helps keep the canvases from sticking together. And the reason why that is helpful is because this, I didn't put a piece of cardboard. I don't think you can really see it, but it's stuck to the front of another canvas. When I peel them apart, it tore a little bit off there. So I just took a little bit of my block of sandpaper, just tried to smooth it out. So when I'm painting that area, I just want to kind of maybe add a little bit of extra paint to cover that up so it's not doesn't show through all the layers of paint. In fact, as I thinking about applying this image, where can I put it? That looks like an area where it could go. I don't really want it in the middle of one of these flowers, so just let's do it this way. Okay. Let's tape that down. So let's put a little bit of tape to keep it in place, so when I'm doing the image transfer, it doesn't slide around. Now I'm going to use some carbon, or this is graphite paper. I ordered this pack off of Amazon. There's 100 sheets in here. I think it was like $10, $12, $14, somewhere around there. And you can use these over and over and over again. Like, so for instance, look how often I've used both of these. Right? Dozens of times. They do run out eventually, because once all the carbon has been scratched off the surface, they're no longer useful. So that one, this one I think is garbage. Let's get that out of the way. This one I think I might have one transfer left in here. And we're just going to move it off to the edge. That way when I trace, I can draw right to the edge of the canvas here. Okay, so now my goal here isn't and has never been to make perfect reproductions of any of these artworks. I just use these templates to kind of jumpstart the painting process, so that, as I said earlier, if you want to learn how to draw, take my drawing course and then you could sketch all these out. But some people just want to paint, and so this is just going to help us jump right to the painting process. But I'm not worried about doing the outline perfectly or painting the outline perfectly either. I always want to emphasize my interest in self-expression over perfection. And I'm sure that Georgia O'Keeffe herself would concur. So that means not worrying about you know, getting the tracing perfectly. Sometimes I see people, like when I'm teaching in person, do these image transfers, and they spend like 45 minutes tracing it. You know, they want to get every line in there perfectly, and that's fair if you're just getting started. You have no idea how many you don't want to be lazy and do a poor job of it. But even people who've been with me for years will do that, and I'm like, just quick, get it done. You don't have to make it look like a masterpiece, because you're going to paint over all of your pencil lines. So it just has to be good enough. And it's funny, when I do this kind of tracing in person in class, I sometimes will look and I'll see people watching me, and they're just like, wow, he's really sloppy with the way he traces. They're just like, yeah, he's not kidding when he says it doesn't have to be perfect. His is just like a mess. I'm not sure what's happening here with that form. I was going to say, I kind of feel like I should have moved it a little bit more off to the right there. It feels a little bit off center, but that's the way she did it. Right, there's a little bit. I'm looking at the flower itself, like how, you know, that's not even a full finger where there's a little bit more. So personally, I probably would have liked to have shifted it over. But hey, that's what Georgia did, so I kind of have a feeling she knew what she was doing. Okay. So that is done. Ah, there's Deborah there. Hi, everyone. Glad that you're back, Michael. Great to see you, Deborah. Okay. What's next here? Now that we've got our image on the canvas, the next step is to stain it with a little bit of color. And this is a step you don't have to do. But let's take a look at see if we can use our detective skills to see if Georgia did this herself. And to be honest, I'm not sure in terms of her painting practice if she would have done this. She would have learned how to do this. She would have been aware of it, but did she do it? It's hard to say. Now, in terms of this painting, I can't see evidence of her doing it or not doing it. It's kind of a lower resolution image, so I'm going to do it. I've done this many times in person, so I know that this works. But it's always a good idea just to kind of, just do a little double check. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my warm yellow for this. So Georgia O'Keeffe would not have used a yellow like this. She probably would have used the more traditional brown that artists who do an Imprimatura do. I like to use this warm yellow. In fact, maybe let me just bring up, I have a little thing here. This just shows some reasons why we do an Imprimatura. One of the things I was teaching recently in person, and I always think how important it is to have a warm-up. And I do that all in the drawing classes. If you've taken the drawing class, you know how important warm-ups are for me. I did, I think, a whole episode on how to warm up. And I think of this Imprimatura as kind of like part of my warm-up. It's a way of just closing the door temporarily on life outside of this painting and just like, okay, let's do something that requires almost zero brain power, that is a routine, it's a habit. I can do it without having to think or mix. The hardest choice I just had to make was really how much water to put in here with my white. And this is really the only time I ever use water, my yellow. The only decision I had to make here was how much water to mix into my warm yellow. And this is the only time I ever use water with acrylic paint. And it works well for the Imprimatura because it's basically staining the surface, right? It soaks into the plaster on the canvas. Other than that, I can do this without any real thought whatsoever. And so this is a really important part of my work creative routine, my creative habit. Just like, Serena Williams when is she still active? Serena Williams, she, before a tennis championship at Wimbledon or something, she doesn't just, crawl out of bed and run out onto the tennis court and win a championship, right? She's got a whole structure of, that day of a routine that she's been following for, probably most of her life to kind of get warmed up and set and into the zone. And I really firmly believe that all artists should have a routine, kind of a series of steps that you do. It's the same sort of thing like, you know, when you get ready for work in the morning, you know, you've got maybe a uniform you put on. I also am a big believer in having, like, that's one of the reasons I think painting clothes are so important, is there a little bit of that uniform. It's like putting your mind into this zone of like, okay, we're going to work. We're going to make some art today. So that, you know, particularly if, you know, once you've got your painting outfit on and, you know, a friend calls and says, hey, I just, my boss called in sick and so office is closed today. Hey, do you want to go to the beach or go for margaritas or something? And you're like, you know what? I just put my painting clothes on and, you know, I started with my Imprimatura. I think I'm busy today, but thanks for the invite. Versus, you know, if you're in your swim trunks and you just started a painting, you're like, well, you know, I could go to the beach. I am already. You know, whereas when you're painting clothes, kind of, there's not very many other things you really want to do besides painting, right? And artists were famous for procrastinating, so anything you can do to kind of short circuit that those negative habits, I believe in 100%. Okay, let's just get some stuff out of the way here. So we'll let this dry for the next, well, how long? I want to talk about the work of Georgia right now, so I'm just like, I was going to say, oh, for the next 10 minutes, and I'm like, we all know it's not going to be 10 minutes. We're going to be here for a little while, but I'm going to do my best to talk about this great artist in a reasonable amount of time. That's awesome. Sandra and Deborah catching up in the chat there. Okay. So while this dries, let's talk a little bit about today's artists and why I think they're so important, and, you know, why I think everybody should know Georgia O'Keeffe. So let's zoom. Oop, no, that's not going to work. Let's move this. Okay. So Georgia O'Keeffe is born in 1887 and lives to the age 98 before she passes away in 1986. So lived an incredible long life, and with, you know, many major chapters, and that we could spend, you know, an episode in each one of those distinct moments or periods in her life. I'm going to try to cover most of it in today's episode. We are going to be doing another episode on Georgia O'Keeffe maybe later this week. We'll see. So I may just, we'll see how time goes here, but I might just cut it in two, or do another episode where I just focus on maybe the interesting little tidbits and facts. Like maybe today will just be about her biography in its most strict sense here. So Georgia O'Keeffe is born in Sun Prairie, Wisconsin, and I wanted to kind of look that up a little bit so that we could just have an idea of where that is. So Sun Prairie here, close to Madison, Wisconsin. Yeah, it's not too far away from Milwaukee and Green Bay. If you're a sports fan, you've probably heard of the Green Bay Packers or Milwaukee Brewers. We've got Chicago down here, Minneapolis, obviously the Great Lakes nearby, and Canada just above here, right? So, you know, what's considered to be the American Midwest, and it's, you know, it's interesting that this is the area where she comes from, because when we think of Georgia O'Keeffe, probably most people would identify her as an artist in the American Southwest, because she did spend really the last half of her life in New Mexico, in Santa Fe area, but she also spent time in Texas and New York as well. Virginia, we'll check out all that here, but just to give a little context of where she is originally from. So George O'Keeffe is, both of her parents were farmers, dairy farmers, and I think that instilled within her a certain kind of work ethic and a comfort with being outside, with getting dirty, and she definitely was not a princess, I guess is the long story short, right? She was someone who liked to roll up their sleeves, put in a hard day's work, and we see that in how prolific of an artist she was. We also see her, she was kind of like an uncompromising person who did what she wanted throughout her entire life and had no apologies, didn't really care what the social norms were. She is often considered to be one of the most important feminist pioneers of the last 100 years, American feminist pioneer, although she didn't really see it that way. Not that she was against the feminist movement, but she really disliked the idea of people calling her a female artist or a feminist artist, because during from like the 1960s and 70s, there was this rise in feminist art, and often people would kind of want to lump her into that movement, and she was like, I just want to be an artist. I don't want all of those other associations or asterisks next to my name, which is totally fair. So I was listening to an interview with her just half an hour ago, talking about like, how did she become an artist? And she herself was saying, I've spent my whole life thinking about that. Why did I become an artist? And she couldn't come up with an answer to the question. So I can't really fill in the blanks for her, how it is that she got interested in art and why she decided to become an artist. But she says somewhere around the age of 12, she made that decision that she wanted to make paintings. She wanted to be a painter. So, from that fairly young age, she was painting and particularly using watercolors was kind of, which I think is in a way a lot of kids learn, because watercolors are, especially today, very easy to clean up and set up, very portable. You can put them in a little box on the shelf and, the things dry very quickly. Watercolors back in the day were a little bit more, often came in tubes with paint that was already a little bit wet, but that's a whole other thing. So she goes to school in the Wisconsin area. You can see Sacred Heart Academy. So, when she's, 1901. So that's like, she's like 14 years old or so, around that age. And when she's, in that early teens and mid-high school period, her father and the family, they moved to Williamsburg, Virginia. Let's bring that up here. Because, this is, this whole part of the eastern United States, even eastern Canada is a little bit of a blind spot for me. So I hear these names like Virginia, and I'm like, okay, yeah. But if you were to ask me to point it out on a map, I'd be like, kind of somewhere between Florida and New York. I'm not sure. Anyway, the family moves out here to Virginia when she's in her high school age. Her father attempted to set up this, what do they call it? Rusticated cast concrete block business, which here's kind of this photograph kind of shows you. It's basically it's intended to look like blocks, marble quarried blocks, like with these uneven shapes on there. And, you know, from where I'm originally from, Calgary, Alberta, we see a lot of this kind of stuff made from actual sandstone. A lot of the beautiful old buildings in downtown Calgary kind of have this look. But there was this, you know, obviously a lot of people are like, sometimes, you know, quarrying rocks and bringing them from, you know, could be hundreds of miles or kilometers away to assemble into a house can be expensive. So what if you just make some molds and pour concrete into it? Boom, you can just make them right on site. Anyway, her father started this business in Virginia, and it failed miserably and put the family into some financial straits, which made life more difficult for the family than certainly otherwise have been, obviously. And I think that also plays into, again, the growing independence of the young Georgia O'Keeffe, right? When it's like, especially being like a young woman, you know, growing up, like, you know, there's a close connection to the family, but when the family has like these extreme financial issues, you know, everyone's got to pitch in, right? So she can't just be this, you know, fulfill the maybe quote unquote traditional gender roles of just going to school to learn how to do, you know, motherly kind of activities, and then hope to find somebody to, you know, have children with. And, you know, she's got to, like, again, roll up those sleeves and get to work. And I think that, again, we see this in her kind of the ambition she had as an artist, because it's not now like, okay, if dad doesn't have any money, I got two choices in life. I can work, you know, some kind of job when I don't really have many skills. I'm still in high school. Or I can be an artist, and I better be a darn good artist. Otherwise, you know, the family is gonna be put out, and I'm gonna starve, right? So I think it made the choices very stark for her, and she decided she was going to be an artist, and she was going to no matter what, be successful at it. So she decides, she studies art, finishes high school in Madison and Wisconsin there, and then she travels down to Texas, where she also became a teacher at what is now was West Texas State Normal College, but which is now known as West Texas A&M University, in Canyon, Texas. Here, was that near? Is that Amarillo? I think Texas A&M has like a big college football team or something, right? I don't know anything about NCAA basketball, football, all that stuff, but I hear those names around. I think it's a pretty successful university. So, you know, this is kind of a big move for a young woman fresh out of high school to leave home in the Midwest and travel down to Texas. And it's interesting because later on, I was listening to an interview with Georgia O'Keeffe, and she's just talking about how that during the time that she's growing up, she heard all of this talk about, you know, the writing of the great American novel, the great American movie, the great American poem, the great American painting, and so on and so forth. And she was saying that most of that talk is happening out east. It's people, you know, maybe in Chicago or in New York. She talks about people who've, you know, all of this making the great American, or people that never went, what did she call it, past the Hudson, I think. So you have all of the American intelligentsia in the American Northwest talking about, you know, making this great American art, but very few of them had ever been, you know, past, let's say, Chicago, St. Louis, into, you know, Texas, never mind, you know, Nevada or California, etc. And I think her traveling at that relatively young age, late teens, early 20s, to Texas was, you know, really opened her eyes. Her brother Alexis was in the military and was stationed out in Texas, and she did visit him before he shipped off for World War One. Now, I didn't do too much research. I don't know what happened to her brother, if he survived the war or not. But obviously, World War One was quite a brutal conflict, and so I'm assuming he survived, just because I feel like if he had died, there would have been more mention of it. One would assume that because of the effect that might have had on her. But anyway, so she comes after spending a few years teaching in Texas. She comes back to Chicago, or back to the Midwest, and takes classes at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. So a few months ago, I visited the Art Institute of Chicago in Chicago, and right adjacent, literally as part of the same building as the Art Institute, there's the School of the Art Institute, which that would be amazing, being a student in that school. And, you know, just down the hallway, you have some of the greatest artworks in human history, certainly of American art history, in the same building. I think that's pretty cool. One thing we'll see with Georgia O'Keeffe is her sort of educational period lasts like 15 years. I don't know necessarily why that happened, but you can see that she's sort of working and then studying. There's sort of periods where she's sort of in and out of schools, taking art lessons from various different artists over an extended period of time. So unlike today, where somebody might go to art school for 2-4 years and be done with it, and go out into the world and make art, you can see Georgia O'Keeffe keeps sort of coming back. So even after she's finished high school, has taught art for a couple of years in Texas, she comes back and takes more classes in Chicago. And you're going to see here in a few years she's going to move to New York and take more classes there. And you could say, well, it's just, that's the life of a perpetual art student. I think it's her just being really responsible. Again, someone who's had to go to and work from a fairly young age to help support the family, and probably didn't have the means or time to just devote years of her life to studying. She's sort of got to save up a little bit of money, and when she's got a bit of money, then she goes back to school, takes what she's learned, puts that back into her teaching, and then teaches for a few years, comes back to school and picks up a few more things. And so during those various different times in and out of schools, she has an opportunity to meet all sorts of different teachers as well as fellow students. And so one of the, well, first of all, I would say, like, when she's at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, obviously there's going to be a lot of great artists that she's in class with, but she becomes known as one of the great students in her kind of cohort, right? She's at the top of her class. She's really, and at the time in school, students are learning very traditional painting techniques. What we call, like, those academic techniques that we've, the techniques we've learned. We're going to do a few of them here today, in fact, but, glazing, that kind of the Imprimatura that we've just did here, the same skills, techniques that Leonardo da Vinci would have used, right? That when you think of classic academic training, that's what she would have learned. And she did win a number of awards, or at least recognitions, for some of that early work. I mean, let's just sort of take a look at some of, like, so here's some of her early watercolors. This painting here, a dead hare with copper pot, that she did a couple years later at the Art Students League of New York, brought her a great deal of recognition. And when that happens, teachers talk and people start saying, like, oh, there's this student's doing really particularly good. In fact, let's just take a look at a few more of her early, there's only 2 more things of hers there. So, let's see. Oh, one of the persons she studied with in New York at the Art Students League was William Merritt Chase, who's also really one of the most, especially in American art, that transitionary period between, classical to avant-garde painting. Merritt Chase is, he was an impressionist, American impressionist painter, and kind of advocate for a bit more of a subjective, personal approach to painting. He also taught many of the artists that became members of the so-called Ashcan School of Art. So I don't know if he directly, let's just take a look at who... So here we have George Bellows, whose painting we did of the boxers. You can see George O'Keeffe listed here. I wanted to see Joseph Stella. We got to do a Joseph Stella episode. He's another really important artist of this period. Kind of like George O'Keeffe, a little bit of an artist who's kind of doesn't fit in properly with the established kind of trajectory of art. So anyway, she has an opportunity to study with all these great artists, but during this period of time, she contracted typhoid fever, and we'll see later on she also gets sick again a number of times. So illness was something that kind of seemed to be kind of carrying through her family throughout her life. While she's in New York, though, she meets Alfred Stieglitz. Is there a little... I should... Oh. Actually, I think it's through drawings that she had made in which she becomes introduced to Stieglitz. Now, Alfred Stieglitz is considered to be arguably the most, well, it's maybe second, third most important photographer of all time. Like a really, really important early photographer, someone who was really important for establishing photography as an art form in and of itself, not just using it for documenting things, but for taking images that could be exhibited side by side with great paintings. And I think we think of that today as like a no-brainer, but back in the day, that was very controversial. The idea that you could make a photograph that people might want to look at for more than just a couple seconds, that wasn't, purely useful for being on the front cover of the newspaper. So Stieglitz was really important in that respect. Stieglitz also was a co-founder of a gallery called 291, which was in New York City. And 291 was really one of the most important art galleries, American art galleries of this period, of the kind of the World War I, pre-World War I period. Because it exhibited, in many instances, was the first place where artists like Picasso, Matisse, and the European avant-garde was the first place that many of them exhibited in North America. So Stieglitz was really on the pulse of what was going on globally with art. And so if you were a young person and you wanted to know what was going on in art, you would go to 291. You'd go see what Stieglitz's gallery had up on the walls, and you might even see some of these great European artists in person and meet them. because outside of that, there was, at least in this pre-war period, I'd say in the United States, but also certainly in Canada. Canada was 10 years, 15, 20 years behind the times at this period of time. Forget about it. So most other institutions in the United States were far, far behind. So Stieglitz is kind of breaking new ground, introducing all of these new artists. And of course, there's resistance to that. People come into the gallery and are like, oh my goodness, if this is what's going on in Europe, we are in trouble. The whole world's falling apart. So he meets the young Giorgio Keefe. Well, I guess at this time, it's 1900. When did she first? I don't know if she met him at that age. So what we're talking, she would have been about 30 years old when she, no, she would have been 20 years old when she first comes to New York. I don't know if she met him at that time, but she certainly went to his gallery at that time. So you could see here, right around the same time, her father is completely bankrupt, another failed business venture, and her mother has tuberculosis. So there's, a lot of tragedy at this young age in her family. So she's trying as best as possible to survive as an artist, and becomes a fairly successful commercial artist. So she's making images like this. We see a lot of the same sort of stuff that members of the Group of Seven here in Canada were making. Similar kind of illustrative works to promote real estate companies or, banks and that kind of stuff. So she survives for a period of time doing commercial art. You can see she gets the measles and moves with her family to Virginia. And at this point in time, she doesn't paint for 4 years. She says that the smell of turpentine made her ill. Which you can imagine, if you're an artist, and this is before acrylic paints, you can either paint, if you're not going to paint in oils, you're going to be painting in watercolor, gouache, tempera maybe. You could be a muralist. But that was pretty uncommon for women to do murals in the traditional method of mural painting in this time. So, just thinking about that, maybe that's one reason why she ends up spending so much time down in the Southwest. There's more space. She can have all the windows open. Just that smell of turpentine, it wouldn't be so toxic smelling. Again, look, she's taking classes at the University of West Virginia during the summer of 1912, and there she meets, one of her teachers is Alan Bement, and Bement is kind of, one of his colleagues is Arthur Wesley Dow, and I think I might have even, do I have a tab open for Dow here? So Wesley Dow was successful as an artist and printmaker, photographer, but mostly as an art teacher, art educator. And he also kind of carried on some of the strategies he learned from his time being a student in Europe. So he had also studied from, let's say, Gustave Bouguereau out there at the Académie Julienne, right? We've talked about a number of great French artists who studied at l'Académie Julienne. But it was also a place where a lot of Americans, Chinese, Japanese, some of the Japanese, Chinese artists that we've talked about also came all the way to Paris to study at l'Académie Julienne. So it's there that he meets a number of other major artists of the time. We're talking in the mid-1800s, during the period of the explosion of Impressionism. But let's come down here to his ideas on art. So, again, all of this sounds or doesn't particularly sound very revolutionary to us today. In fact, it's sort of like, what's the big deal, maybe? But his, the thing that he he taught and wrote about was really emphasizing the importance of personal expression in art, of finding your own voice and using composition to help you be more personally expressive. And I think, almost today, it's sort of, when you hear that, you think, what is the alternative? I don't even know what as opposed to doing what, which shows how times have changed. Again, for us to be like, okay, we talk about this to like kindergarten kids in art class today. We talk about this all, kids by the time they're 10, 15 years old, this just seems like makes perfect sense. But you're talking really up until artists like Dow, this idea of personally expressing your own thoughts and feelings is revolutionary. It's something you're not supposed to do, because prior to the Impressionists, really the goal is to communicate what the person commissioning you wants to say, right? That which is usually a king or a queen, a super wealthy person, or the church. Really, you don't have very many options, right, for clients. And so your goal is to illustrate the Bible as best as possible. Make a painting of someone's house or estate the best way possible. Or paint a king or queen being coronated, or doing some, important thing on a battlefield, signing an important treaty or a banquet, etc. So there's not a lot of room for personal expression or interpretation. But with the Impressionists, that whole approach to painting has been completely overturned. So now that's happening in Europe, but again, back, in North America, United States, Canada, Mexico, they're still very much practicing the ancient, or not ancient, but the classical academic approach to making art. And so it's not until you have artists who have studied in Europe, like Dow, who come back from being in Paris in this kind of revolutionary period, and start kind of spreading the message back home. And, to the consternation of some of their colleagues at the various universities and schools where they were found jobs at. But suffice to say that the history has shown them to have been on the right side of things. But I think, let me see if there's an interesting quote here. Well, I'm just going to read this. Wesley Dow's ideas were quite revolutionary for the period. Dow taught that rather than copying nature, individuals should create art through elements of the composition, such as line, mass, and color. He wanted leaders of the public to see art as a living force for all in everyday life, not as a sort of traditional ornament for the few. Right? That art could have this transformative power, and he wanted people in power to recognize that and to respect art. So Dow suggested that the American lack of interest in art would improve if art was presented as a means of self-expression. He wanted people to be able to include personal experience in creating art. So I just find that whole quote very interesting, right? In the mid-1800s, he's writing about how frustrated he is that your so-called everyday American doesn't care about art. Times have really not changed at all. Artists throughout history have always felt that, like, how come people don't care about art, right? So he's thinking about the same sort of thing. But his idea is, especially in America, right? If he thinks, like, if Americans could see or make art that was all about personal expression, that more other Americans might care about it more, which really taps into that particular kind of American idea of self-realization, right? Like, the American dream, creating, your own vision and realizing it, right? And so I think what he's trying to do is tap into that concept that, Americans just don't like art because it just looks like, stuff that old European guys make. But, if artists were making stuff that was, really personally important, personal expressions, other Americans would be like, oh, but I like that. That feels very American to me. I find that very, very interesting. And so this is someone who becomes very important and influential in the art of Georgia O'Keeffe, just to tie all of these back together here. So, it's not so long after she's introduced to the art of Wesley Dow that those ideas of being more personally expressive to her really resonate. And she, one of the first kind of series of artworks that she makes after this breakthrough is a series of charcoal drawings that she does that are quite abstract. And so these are the ones that Alfred Stieglitz first sees, and he has some kind of quote that says, wow, these, I wonder if Wikipedia's got the quote of his in here. Oh, it does. Okay, so Alfred Stieglitz sees these drawings and says he found them to be the purest, finest, and most sincere things that had entered Gallery 291 in a long while, and said that he would like to show them. Right, and he exhibited 10 of those drawings, these breakthrough artworks that she had created. And so clearly, if you're a young artist, particularly a young female artist, and you've created something that really one of the most important photographers and gallery owners in New York, who's tied directly into the European avant-garde, looks at it and goes, these are amazing. These are some of the purest, finest, most sincere things that I have seen in a long time. I want to exhibit your work. Then that's about as big of a stamp of approval as you could possibly have. And it's a few years later on from there that they begin a long relationship. They're together for many years. There's ups and downs in that relationship we'll get to here shortly. But they definitely, Alfred Stieglitz and Georgia O'Keeffe were both very ambitious artists, and also they really supported each other's work. Listening to an interview with O'Keeffe this morning, just hearing her talk about how, ironically, even though he owned this art gallery, his favorite, according to Georgia O'Keeffe, his favorite word was no, because he never wanted to sell her work because he liked it so much that he didn't want to see it leave the gallery. So Georgia O'Keeffe talks about talking to him like, listen, Alfred, like, I really appreciate how much you like the work, but it would be really nice to have some money. and because, he would come back home each day and be like, oh man, there's this guy came in, just loved your paintings, and he wanted to buy, like 5 of those big, paintings you did. And George is like, whoa, my goodness, wow, that's so, but Alfred's like, but don't worry, I told him no, that there's under no circumstance am I going to sell those paintings, they're so beautiful. And George is like, Alfred, like, gosh, I love you to bits, but I can make more of these, sweetheart. Like, it's okay if you sell. I really appreciate the thought, but it'd be really nice to be able to have a little bit more spending money. which I think is very funny. I don't think any of that's here, but directly from an interview I was listening with her talking about it. I just think that's super hilarious. I did want to... There's a... Okay. So, another thing that... I don't know if it's written in here, but she, really up until this time, has been doing most of her work in watercolor. And Stieglitz is the one that really encourages her to move from watercolor to oil paint. According to him, or according to what she said, he said, is that watercolors were mostly identified with female artists, and that was always going to hold her back, and he wanted her to make oil paintings to... there's more likelihood of selling work like that and also being more appreciated going forward. So... and I was thinking about all of that today, this idea of, watercolors being more quote-unquote feminine than oil paint being more masculine. I don't know if those... I mean, I can understand, I can see why those connotations existed. I think that because watercolors are... you can make them very small. They're easy to clean up. They don't take up a lot of space. They dry very quickly, right? So there's that idea of, just they're perfect for, a mom or a young woman who doesn't have a lot of, doesn't want to occupy a lot of space. Talk about like women always sort of being, pushed into these small spaces physically, socially, economically, all sorts of different kinds of things, right? And I think in one way you can see how watercolors fit perfectly into that, as opposed to oil paint. Oil is messy. It requires space. A lot of people don't like the smell of it, so you have to, have money. You have to have, a studio with windows. It takes sometimes months to dry, so you have to, all of those require maybe other more means, and that's the idea of like men always just stretching out, taking up big room, and like so there's those connotations, but also like these things still hold true today. Is there's still these ideas that drawing is a means to a oil painting, right? Even up until very recently, you couldn't even be taken seriously as an artist if you were making acrylic painting, let alone painting in oil, right? So I think most of those things have sort of come by the passed into history, but I'd still, if you had two paintings that were almost identical, one was a watercolor and one was an oil painting, as much as we might want to disagree or fight over it, you could easily double the price tag on the oil painting and still sell them. It's just, these are notions that people have had for hundreds and hundreds of years that probably aren't going to go away overnight. Okay, I want to speed. Okay, I gotta get my. What else can I say here? I just kind of moved past there, but one of the things that Stieglitz, being a photographer, and he's now with this woman who's younger than him, is he ends up taking a lot of photographs of her, particularly nude photographs of her, and those nude photographs become exhibited by Stieglitz to kind of the embarrassment of George O'Keeffe, at least at first, because the one thing that happens is that those photographs really sexualized George O'Keeffe, and that pretty much from that point on colored how people saw her work and arguably still see her work to this day, in that thinking of George O'Keeffe as being this very physical person, that her body, her sexuality was on display, and that she was, you know, very free, and that the later paintings, all the flower paintings she made, are all representations, either directly or indirectly, of female anatomy particularly. And those were things that absolutely drove Georgia O'Keeffe mad throughout the rest of her life. And I think those nude photographs that Stieglitz took, I think they seem to have been done, from all I understand, in the most playful way possible. They apparently had a very healthy, vibrant relationship together, and they were, you know, very progressive for their time. Again, Stieglitz is probably one of the most progressive Americans in terms of his appreciation for modern art. But I still think that Georgia O'Keeffe probably would have liked for maybe some of those photographs to have been, you know, they're not what we would say like vulgar in any way. They're very artful, but, you know, we're talking about 1920s, you know, still pretty conservative. This is not like, you know, if you took the same photographs today, people would yawn, oh, really? Big deal. But 1920s nude photographs of an artist who's quite becoming kind of visible at the time is, you know, that's eye-opening, to say the least, right? So it is unfortunate, though, because, again, still to this day, people look at the artwork of Georgia O'Keeffe in a particular way, in a way that she, under no circumstance, wanted or encouraged. Anyway, we'll come back to this here in a moment. I just want to take a look at, I find this really fascinating, this kind of progression of this motif, the red canna flower, over the years. And we could see this kind of zooming into the flower. And I think it's no mistake that Georgia O'Keeffe goes from making paintings like this, where you see an entire flower, to a closer up view of a flower, to a zoom in detail of a flower. I think it's not as surprising that she's doing this when she begins this relationship with Alfred Stieglitz, one of the most important photographers of all time, right? Because to me, I look at this and think, no one would have made a painting like this before the advent of photography. When you have artists and photographers that are using the camera to get up close to things like flowers. And Georgia O'Keeffe also became a photographer sort of during the 1930s, 40s herself. So this, to me, shows the influence of photography in her work. And I don't mean that in any negative way. You know, some people people have weird hang-ups over photography when it comes to painting and using photographs for art. I think what she did is saw how photography allows us to maybe get closer to things than we normally do, especially when it came for paintings, because throughout the history of still life painting of flowers, I mean, 99.9% of them are all, you see the entire bouquet of flowers in a vase on a table. Maybe there's other things, there's some fruits, or there's maybe possessions of the person commissioning the painting. You know, you might have, it could be a landscape with some flowers in the foreground. But to then get closer and closer to the point where the flower takes up almost the entire field of view, that's one of the radical innovations of George O'Keeffe's work, and I'm positive that there's a direct correlation between that and her spending more and more time with a photographer. So this kind of, these three images here seem, they're perfectly illustrate that transition of those years of the transformation in her composition. And this goes back to Wesley Dow when we were talking about him using composition to as a way to help artists be more personally expressive. Because, when we're talking about just painting, let's say you make a painting of a vase of flowers. Well, I mean, Van Gogh is a great example of someone who could make that painting look absolutely uniquely his. But that's pretty tricky for most artists to do. Most artists, you paint a full vase of flowers, to make it look distinctly individual and to carry a personal message, you really would have to have a very distinct style. But when you start zooming in and filling the picture plane up with those flowers, well, that's a very bold compositional choice, which makes it a very bold expression of from oneself, right? And so I think this perfectly also encapsulates some of the ideas that she learned during those times when she was in art school, and the number of art schools she attended, right? Okay, I need to get into painting here as quickly as possible. Just kind of briefly, because we won't talk really about this next class, I don't think, just when people have sort of pinned her down as the person who's starting to paint pictures of flowers and still lifes, she's, again, spending a lot of time in New York. That's where Stieglitz's gallery was. I think it closed in 1918. And they're living on like the 30th floor of a skyscraper apartment complex in New York. And she's seeing all these big buildings, and yet she's painting kind of these flowers. And so she decides, as soon as people are like, oh, that's the flower artist, she's like, okay, well, that's what you think I'm going to do? I'm going to paint skyscrapers for the next few years. So some of these paintings she did of skyscrapers are also absolutely gorgeous. And I think that it's really fantastic, just because it shows someone who's resisting being sort of categorized into this one box, and just when people thought they've got her nailed down, she worms out and does something totally different here. So by this time, she's at the Brooklyn Museum, does a retrospective of her work. This is, by the late 20s, and she's exhibiting all over the place. I think this is really funny too. In 1928, Stieglitz announced that he sold 6 of her paintings for what would have been the outrageous sum of $25,000. And yet there's no evidence that actually happened, but what it did do is cause the prices of her other works to skyrocket. So I think this just is a little bit of what happens behind the doors in the art market. There's a lot of that shifty stuff that happens. Art being kind of pumped up and then sold at inflated values. But let's see. You know what? Maybe we should. Might be a good place for us to stop here. The one thing I will say, just kind of coming back to the relationship between Alfred Stieglitz and George O'Keeffe, is that they had an open relationship. So they would see other people and date other people. Whose idea that was, I don't know. But one of the things, though, is that he certainly took advantage of that. So it suggests that he was probably the genius behind that idea. That when he began a relationship with this woman. What's her name? I don't know if it's in here or not. Dorothy and Norman. Dorothy Norman. So this is this woman that Stieglitz began a long-term affair with in 1928, and it caused Georgia O'Keeffe a lot of mental anguish, and essentially led to her having a series of nervous breakdowns in the early 1930s. And so for a period of time between 1932 and 1934, she basically didn't make much of any work at all. In fact, today's painting is one of the first paintings she made after this hiatus. And the other painting we're going to do is one of the first paintings she did, or one of the last paintings she did before that nervous breakdown. Maybe in retrospect I should have done them in the other order, but so I do think that there's both I think there's as much as Georgia O'Keeffe didn't want to Georgia O'Keeffe really resisted the insinuation of her work having any kind of sexual content, representations of female anatomy whatsoever. I think she found that very offensive and belittling. This idea that was, basically all women were capable of doing, or that was, what was on the forefront of their minds, and things like she herself said that basically when people say that about her work, that says way more about them than it does about her, which I agree 100%, right? But what I would say is, there's something about painting flowers and these enlarged flowers, especially coming out of this, the trauma of seeing her husband having this affair with this other woman and being quite open about it. Again, they technically had an open relationship, but generally there's usually one person who's a little bit more open than the other one. And I think in many ways, these flowers, which she continued to do on and off for many, many years of her life, I think are also there's a comfort in them. There's like a refuge, a safety. There's something about, just think about when you're looking at these flowers, when you see a flower so up close. Let's see where. I don't know. Let's just look at some of these here. When you're seeing flowers that close up, you have to have your nose right in that flower. You're really smelling